Hello viewers and followers, you have come across the 8th in a series of 11 videos detailing the Dark Seeker saga of the Kingdom Hearts franchise, so this video will be running on the assumption that you are well versed in the first 7 games in this series. These include Kingdom Hearts Final Mix, Rechained Memories, Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, 358 Days Over 2, Birth by Sleep Final Mix, Recoded, and Dream Drop Distance. I know I say this going into every entry now, but in this particular case we're in for a very unique instance of approachable but not really, which will become evident very shortly given the unique circumstance surrounding the 2/3 titles that I shall be telling you all about within the next hour. That is because this video is particularly special in that it's covering only a portion of what I consider the 8th canon title in the series alongside its 9th entry, so buckle up on this one. If you aren't familiar with the series prior to the events around what this key is, that looks like a fancy X, or need a brush up on the 7 previous entries, may I direct you to my 7 videos discussing this crazy crossover series. I know 20 hours of your life is a lot of time to dedicate, but I believe that they're quite comprehensive as pseudo-gameplay reviews as well as clarifying the plot. That alone is a major draw of Kingdom Hearts as a series. Still shorter than playing the games themselves, of which I also have 6 playlists of pure gameplay if you like a simpler and longer experience, but if you're here or subscribe to me anyways, you aren't really looking for a 10-minute summary of everything, now are you? Plus, they make for great podcasts, I hear, so thank anyone who listens beyond these openings. If you are up to date with the 7 titles before this, then let's open the first chapter of dissecting the enigma that is Kingdom Hearts Key. Before I begin, I want to give a huge shout out to the legendary Everglow. All footage from the smartphone game in this video belongs to him and his playthrough of this entry in the series, so all credit to him since I didn't have a way to record the game proper in time for these videos. I've been a big fan and subscriber for years back when you were Pacey8444, so keep up the great work and thanks for your contributions to this series. Go subscribe to him if you want proper Kingdom Hearts gameplay videos and up-to-date translations on this title in particular, but his channel is an all-around great Kingdom Hearts resource to begin with. A link to his channel is included in the description, as well as taking up the majority of my playlist covering this portion of the series I used for this video. So if you feel like getting to the actual meat of this video without my upcoming context for why this game in particular is confusing to discuss, and instead want to get right to the important confusion, timestamps are provided in the description below for your listening and or viewing pleasure. With my proper crediting and fanboying out of the way, let's begin a hefty preamble. Warning, this video is going to get messy real quick. This one's going to take some clarifications, so bear with the expository dump for a little bit. To put it simply, after the release of Kingdom Hearts 3D and its hinting of HD remasters on the horizon in 2012, Japan would be graced a year later with Kingdom Hearts Key, which was a browser-based canon title to the series. It officially launched in the summer of 2013 and ran for 3 years before going offline in 2016. And series director Tetsuro Nomura said that it was written in tandem with the then elusive Kingdom Hearts 3. International players were given the apparent cold shoulder here. But this was somewhat alleviated in the following year when Square Enix officially revealed what 3D had hinted about. Kingdom Hearts HD 1.5 Remix would not only contain the expected graphical and gameplay adjustments to the first 2 titles, but they would also be the final mix and remake versions released for the first time outside of Japan for the first 2 entries, plus an HD film of 358 Days Over 2, all of which I have already covered. This new number would obviously lend many of us in the fandom to assume that a 2.5 would soon follow, and in 2014, it dropped a year after its predecessor. This left many of us curious as to the next step. While 3D had released 2 years prior on the Nintendo 3DS, it would be nice to also have that game joined in the HD Remix treatment, if only to have it alongside the rest of the series on what was then the PlayStation 3, and hopes that a PlayStation 4 port would launch after Kingdom Hearts 3 was officially announced during E3 2013 to keep it all on one system. While it would be easy for 3D to make the HD jump, since most of the models in the remixes seem to have come from that title, what about the PC game only Japan got? If that was canon, surely they might release an HD movie of sorts to help global fans catch up as they did for Dazed and Recoded previously if the game isn't being brought over, right? Well, it turns out Nomura kinda had our backs on this one. In 2015, it was announced that Kingdom Hearts Key would be remade for smartphones and indeed be released internationally as well. So while Japan was enjoying 2 versions of the same game, asterisk, global fans would have to wait over half a year for the spring of 2016 to finally get into the hullabaloo that was Kingdom Hearts Key, now rebranded as Kingdom Hearts Unchained Key for iOS and Android. Now, why was all of this important? Because I swear there's a point to this history lesson. This video was largely made in December 2018 and released in January 2019, where as of the publishing date of this video, Kingdom Hearts 3 is finally set to release in Japan in under 2 weeks. That is extremely close to having a majority of the lingering plot threads and mysteries of the series to hopefully get some satisfying answers and/or conclusions in regards to everything Xehanort and thus the Darkseeker saga. I am expecting the usual lingering threads to pull for whatever comes after Kingdom Hearts 3, be it Kingdom Hearts 4 or another build-up spin-off title, but that is why this is the only first part of what is known as Unchained Key here. That being said, I do not have all the answers for questions and mysteries that I will bring up in this video, similar to 3D, which is honestly kind of exciting. I'm not asking questions and pretending not to know some of the answers to them. You're receiving a lot of my thoughts as of weeks before some of them might be answered, but this also leads me into why everything surrounding Kingdom Hearts Key is tricky to discuss. You see, as the browser game ended in 2016, that eventually told an episodic story with a beginning, middle, and sort of ending. While some consider Kingdom Hearts Key and Unchained Key to be different titles, and they aren't wrong, for reasons pertaining to my sanity, I simply refer to both games as the 8th entry in the series collectively, sort of similar to a final mix of sorts, or at the very least a remake like Chain of Memories and Coded received. For while Key had an ending when it shut down in a very climactic event, which I will get to in 2 videos, it was known that Unchained Key would then continue the story beyond the events told in that browser game. So, while the majority of Unchained Key is a sort of condensed recap of events that happened in Key, it is not strictly speaking the same game. And as of this video, Unchained Key has been rebranded as Union Cross, as a sort of second season that covers events beyond what will be depicted in this video. Since the mobile game is expected to run beyond the events of Kingdom Hearts 3, and is pretty evidently setting us up for what comes beyond Xehanort's endgame, the game must be separated into various forms and deconstructed so everyone remains on the same page here. And I realize some of you are wondering why it's taken me this long to warn you about all of the various shapes this title has taken. For starters, one of the main complaints of this series back then was its tendency to be all over the place in terms of platforms. In total, the series spans the PlayStations 2, 3, and 4, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS and 3DS, the PlayStation Portable, PC, and smartphones. Part of the HD Remix's goals were to align the series on as few platforms as possible in their most updated formats, specifically on the PlayStation 4. This means that all but this smartphone title are all available on one system, which is a huge leap in making this more digestible for fans and newcomers alike. That being said, not everyone plays mobile games, and a large chunk of the fanbase hasn't played Unchained Key and maybe was waiting for an HD film or some sort of compilation to explain away what happened, some not knowing that this is indeed canon and will apparently mean something by the time Kingdom Hearts 3 rolled around. This is particularly why my videos exist, to help those who either can't or haven't a clue what Key is about, to help understand why the story is setting up and how it relates to the other games on PS4. Because the hour-long film that was included in the 2.8 collection wasn't exactly the recap some were expecting, and I will cover that in this video as well. So to be as simple as possible, I will only be covering the events of Unchained Key that pertain to the events of Key. For the intents and purposes of this video, I will address what is essentially Season 1 of the events of Kingdom Hearts Key, and how the mobile game Unchained Key covered them. While 2.8 launched on PS4 in January of 2017, it included a short film titled Kingdom Hearts Key Back Cover, which directly pertains to background events of Key and Unchained Key. I know, that's too many keys being thrown around here, but that's why I'm going to now focus up on the mobile game, where most international fans will be starting from anyways, unless you watch the HD film, but again, context. Thank you for sticking with me up to this point. Let's begin the proper discussion of this messy and convoluted batch of titles.
This is where your story began. The story of your very own adventure.
As the opening of this video showcased during my long-winded preface, Kingdom Hearts Unchained Key quite literally opens up with the fairy tale that Kyrie's grandmother told her when she was only 5 years old. Being presented in a pop-up, book-style manner similar to the CGI opening of 3D, it details the story of a great battle between light and darkness. Those familiar with Birth by Sleep will recognize the title Key as pertaining to the ancient Keyblade War, which has major ties to Kingdom Hearts as an entity and to the series as a whole. As such, Unchained Key depicts events that seem to be during this fabled era, making Unchained Key the earliest in the timeline by quite a large margin, surpassing Birth by Sleep but seemingly keeping its distance to the other titles for now. Since we now realize that we're going to be taking part in the events around the Keyblade War, the game will instruct you to create your own character, who will be known as Player for the purposes of this video. After some brief customization, the player will be presented with one of 5 unions to join in the form of a dive to the heart: Unicornus, Anguis, Ursus, Vulpes, Leopardus. Bearing the sigil of a unicorn, snake, bear, fox, and leopard respectively, this sanctions off a player into them for gameplay and minor story differences, though the main plot is the same outcome regardless. I'll get more into this when I deal with the gameplay, but know that it doesn't change much for narrative reasons beyond who you play with in-game and who you see in specific cutscenes. For the curious, I'm a member of Team Vulpes, who also happen to be the most popular union in the global game, but I'll keep the narrative in line with Everglow here in the footage, as he chose Unicornus. After selecting a union, the player is granted their first new Keyblade of Unchained Key, Starlight. Quite a bit of tutorializing occurs here, which we'll skip over for now since this is a mobile game after all. In the beginning, it's very newcomer friendly. To move around hardware limitations that rendering in 3D would present, Unchained Key instead commits to its fairy tale premise and is presented with nice, clean 2D art assets across static backgrounds, making me somewhat nostalgic for the days of the 3 PlayStation 1 Final Fantasy titles. After the first mission, the player is introduced to Chirithy, an adorable little cat-like being in a cape and a mysterious purse that was assigned by a certain someone, and reiterates the basics of the series. The world is being attacked by monsters of darkness known as Heartless, and the Keyblade is the most effective weapon against them. To save the world, the player must go out and stop the spread of darkness by collecting light, and is able to upgrade their Keyblade along the way as they grow stronger as well. A few battles later, the player runs into a mysterious figure wearing the mask of the union they chose. Congratulating them on wielding the Keyblade, a dark side attacks while other Keyblade wielders jump in to aid the player in its defeat. In this case, the mask-wielding character claims that they are fighting for a shared cause and collecting light, but that some are instead acting on behalf of the darkness instead of bringing peace to the world. The leader instructs players to go forth and find those who would use light for darkness and departs, Chirithy encouraging the player to travel to other worlds that have been overrun by Heartless, setting up the basic world-hopping scenario Kingdom Hearts is known for. What follows is the player jumping into a portal via their Keyblade that resembles a portal to the lanes between, but directly transports them with Chirithy's help to Dwarf Woodlands, home of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Immediately, players familiar with Birth by Sleep will be skeptical, as the opening cutscene is almost verbatim the exact line spoken in the actual Disney film. While it makes sense from a fairy tale's perspective, those who value continuity will begin to have questions raised in the entire setup of the game in general. More to the point, most of what transpires in these early chapters are frankly all grindy filler. Because yes, Unchained Key is a mobile game, and is thus more gameplay heavy than plot filled, much to the annoyance of many a Kingdom Hearts fan. Like most of you here, you're likely only interested in the titles around Kingdom Hearts Key like I was because of the promise of canon plot developments. While it makes sense for a bunch of the early game to do the usual running around Disney worlds and meeting the protagonists that Sora and company often do in the 3D games to begin with, the type of gameplay Unchained Key possesses is quite a specific model, and I will address that more in the future. All you need to know now is that 31 of the first 34 story quests are all about meeting some of the characters setting up Dwarf Woodlands, Wonderland, and Agrabah, all 3 returning worlds from previous entries, curiously starting from the beginning of their respective stories, and sometimes being a prologue to them, as if the previous adventures haven't occurred yet, which makes sense being the earliest point in the timeline, but then why are the same Disney characters present in the future? Are they immortal? That's mysterious. Anyway, don't worry. I don't plan on covering most of the Disney worlds here, since many consist of exact line-for-line scenes from their respective films with a bunch of gameplay filler thrown in, all revolving battling Heartless along the way and doing a bunch of mundane quests that would make any MMO proud. So to keep all of your guys' sanity as well as my own, I will instead be focusing on the more important plot points, most of which revolve around the main hub world for Unchained Key this time around, Daybreak Town, which the player will return to for Quest 35. Investigating what fell from the skies above Daybreak Town, the player runs across a Moogle collecting numerous gummy blocks around the waterfront, only to then spot none other than Donald, Duck, and Goofy. Putting aside all pertinent questions for now, Donald instead summarizes the situation after asking why the player has a Keyblade. Explaining that their gummy ship fell apart, the player agrees to take a radar that retrieves gummy blocks from Gummy Heartless, since Donald and Goofy are without weapons for some reason. This first somewhat substantial questline extends to the trio of Disney worlds, many of which drag the player into various other side quests, but long story short, the player eventually runs into Mickey Mouse alongside Chip and Dale as the king bails the player out from a Heartless ambush. Taking the Chipmunk duo to help Donald and Goofy, as they are chiefly gummy ship engineers, the player then seeks out the remaining Gummy Heartless. At the end of Quest 81, the player finally gathers enough gummy blocks to help restore the ship into the shape of a ship instead of a car or a boat, and the 5 Disney characters take off for their world. world. Chirithy poofs onto the scene with a familiar sound effect, remarking on how animated their guests were. The game then throws the player back into exploring the same 3 Disney worlds, many of which you'll become very familiar with thanks to all the backtracking and repetition involved, before the plot finally deigns to appear in what you can consider a prologue, longer than the infamous one in Kingdom Hearts 2, and that's quite a feat. Except this time it's not building up a mystery surrounding a familiar-looking teenager in a world that turns out to be a data simulation in an attempt to bide time hiding him from an organization made up of enemy villains intent to using him for their own various ends. Oh wait, I'm literally getting ahead of myself. Let's get back to the proper opening to the game. Kingdom Hearts Unchained Key sort of decides to kinda begin in Quest 92 through 96, believe it or not, as it finally shows Daybreak Town's title card that most worlds introduce themselves with in the series. Chirithy begins by narrating that he was once born enveloped in radiant light amidst a world of darkness. He appears within a flash before being released, gazing upon his smiling master as we return to the present where Chirithy speaks to the player after feeling that they've got a handle on the Keyblade. Chirithy then begins the long-awaited explanation on what's happening and why. His creator, the Master, had 6 apprentices to whom he had bestowed names and a copy of the Book of Prophecies to 5 of them, who would then be known as the Foretellers. The book that opened up this story is none other than the same tome that Maleficent herself mentioned in Recoded, so the gears will begin to turn for a lore-prepared Kingdom Hearts fan. After reading through their copies, the final entry is what stuck out to the 5 of them. On that fated land, a great war shall transpire. Darkness will prevail, and the light expire. Preemptively acting on this ominous future the Book of Prophecies naturally foretold, their master mysteriously disappeared one day. The 5 Foretellers decided to draw upon the powers of the book and grant its abilities to various Keyblade wielders. Since the Book of Prophecies can harness forces from the future, Keyblade wielders are given various medals to combat the inevitable darkness to safeguard the light from the prophesized ending passage. Chirithy then tells the player that while the Foretellers are all working towards the same goal, they each walk a different path, reminding the player to never lose their own. This small bit of plot is all you really get for the next 100 plus quests, no joke. It won't be until Quest 231 that something substantial occurs once more that isn't simply filler around Disney worlds. If you think my videos are slow burns, imagine how it feels playing this, realizing that everything I've summarized so far took Everglow's playthrough around 10 hours to reach. Most of that is gameplay, yes, but most Kingdom Hearts games are filled with snappy gameplay that leads to story beats in a much shorter time frame than Unchained doles out its content. It gets better, but I'll save that for later. Chirithy informs the player that a brand new breed of Heartless has been seen around Daybreak Town, meeting up with 3 other Keyblade wielders who are also set on combating the new threats. Promising to return to their house once they've taken care of the Neo-Shadows around the town, the 4 wielders set off to gather some Lux and thin out the monsters. During the Heartless hunt, Chirithy meets up with another Chirithy as they converse about how their wielders don't seem to realize what's going on. Saying how they must keep the 5 unions from falling, we eventually catch up to the player meeting back at the house, only to have another Chirithy relay a message that his wielder was sorry that they couldn't keep their promise, disappearing in a puff of smoke afterwards. Outside, Chirithy meets up with that same Chirithy on the ground, claiming his wielder vanished into darkness. Confirming that the Chirithy are bound to their wielders, the Chirithy then claims that this is the end, vanishing into light similar to his lost wielder. The player's Foreteller shows up next to the lone Chirithy, saying that while all the Keyblade wielders are collecting Lux faster than expected, the darkness is also expanding at an even faster rate. Asking the Foreteller if there truly is a traitor among the 5, the leader isn't ready to believe it yet, leaving the player with just another 100 story missions to coast through before the first actually important plot progression occurs. Seriously. Beginning with Quest 351, the player appears to dream of the 5 Foretellers being addressed by their master in the large clock tower that looms above Daybreak Town. When trying to approach, darkness swallows at the player and wakes up to find Chirithy commenting how their dream must have been a doozy given how restless they were. Telling the player to go back to sleep, Chirithy addresses the other Chirithy outside their window, being asked if the dream was their doing. Proclaiming that he showed the player the dream to combat the other Chirithy, the other claims that this makes them enemies, the player's Chirithy vowing to protect them from what's coming. A lot of vagueness going on here if you're playing the game normally and forgetting what the main plot is. You would be forgiven for the confusion as it honestly is about to start up soon. Later on, the money-focused Moogle informs the player that a large monster is scaring away customers in Waterfront Park, urging the wielder to go off and deal with the threat. Arriving to see a Keyblade wielder narrowly defeating an invisible, the snappily dressed boy introduces himself as Ephemer, here belonging to Volps, though he will always be in a different union than the player. After introducing themselves, in a rare instance of the player speaking for themselves rather than through Chirithy in their silent protagonist mode the other 99% of the time, Ephemer says that though they're on different unions, he considers himself union-free for his current task. Leaving the player perplexed, Ephemer elaborates on the secret task he's currently undertaking by asking if the player can keep a secret, to which he then claims that the worlds they're visiting are merely holograms or projections. Elaborating that the lux they're collecting in the so-called other worlds are actually Daybreak Town's light, Ephemer tries to simplify his goal. While the world is connected by land, there's apparently a mechanism he's searching for that allows them to visit the various worlds. Believing that the Book of Prophecies is what's allowing them to do such, Ephemer continues that while each of the 5 unions are gathering the light of the world, each union has its own separate goals, the player reflecting on their earlier dream. Telling Ephemer of their dream, the player leads them to the location to get to the bottom of this mystery, the player's Chirithy popping behind them to address the other Chirithy, who is now visibly darker in coloration and condescendingly plays coy as to if he's Ephemer's Chirithy or not. Asking if he's going to allow them to learn the truth, the 2 Keyblade wielders search around the base of the tower for a way in, eventually finding one in a manhole in a drained section of water near the large bridge crossing before the tower. They proceed to go beyond the waterway, defeating the numerous Heartless that they run across. Saving the player from an invisible to return the earlier favor, Ephemer decides to stop here when a giant clock gear stops before the path further in. Pointing out that while it took this long to find a way inside the tower, it would be suspicious to their union leaders if they're gone for too long, also unsure of how long it would take to find the room that the player saw in their dream. Agreeing to meet up tomorrow at the Fountain Square at noon, Ephemer and the player part for the day, Chirithy enjoying seeing his wielder happy after making a new friend. After remarking how he doesn't have any friends, the player does the expected thing and tells Chirithy that they are friends, the small cat adorably confused at the concept. Later on that night, Ephemer apologizes to the player as he sneaks back to the stopped gear, proceeding into the tower alone. The next day, the player is shown waiting hours for Ephemer, who was a no-show, Chirithy eventually meeting up with the player to help lessen the sting. Claiming that friends always keep their promises and that he likely had something important come up, the player lifts the Chirithy in thanks, lifting up his cape to reveal the familiar spirit emblem on his back. I know, it's weird to finally get something substantial to chew on after all this long, but it is appreciated. Not too long after that, Quest 401 finally shows us a legitimately important scene between Ephemer, a proper main character, as well as the Foreteller. Ephemer and Vulpsa's union leader are talking to each other on the fountain, addressing her as Master Ava as we enter almost mid-conversation. Suggesting talking about the Book of Prophecies might cheer the down Foreteller up, Master Ava refuses, seeing through what she assumes is a ploy to reveal more information. Both play it off though, Ephemer reminiscing on having just met the player and addressing them as a new friend, poking fun at their mostly silent protagonist state. Saying they're meeting up tomorrow, they both bid each other farewell. Remarking that if the worst happens, Master Ava says she wouldn't mind leaving the future up to kids who see the world as Ephemer does, leaving off with hoping that the wind carries her Dandelions as the freaking title screen finally shows up. Congratulations, we finally started the game. Almost 400 story quests in. Let that sink in as to why those of us who played and stuck with this title for the last 2, almost 3 years might be legally qualified to be recognized as saints for the amount of patience we obviously have. And I'm taking the opportunity afforded by the logo finally popping up after all this time here to finally talk about the actual gameplay of this video game. I know, the story just woke up and finally gave us some interactions between players who can consistently talk to each other with agency of their own, but I need to at least do my usual thing and at least give some context to the game that is stretching its story of this 8th title to its breaking point.
But please cheer up.
Thank you. If the worst happens, I'll be glad to leave the future to the kids who see the world in the way that you do. Let the wind carry you far, far away. My Dandelions.
Okay, time to contextualize a bit of the gameplay footage you've been seeing on screen in a small dedicated section. Being a mobile Kingdom Hearts game focusing on the events of the ancient Keyblade War, it made sense to make this title the one to feature kinda multiplayer features in what's generally known as a single-player franchise. The game does a good job explaining the most basic of features and is very newcomer-friendly, initially even if you aren't well-versed in the deepest lore that is Kingdom Hearts, but anyone who's been following along knows that this isn't really going to be true the further you dive into this title. But for gameplay purposes, anyone can jump in and theoretically enjoy what's on offer here. I'll try and avoid anything involving the money aspect that's inherent to the style of game, but no promises. First off, being a smartphone game, the basics of the series had to be condensed into a one-finger touch control scheme. Appropriately simplified, the presentation featuring clean and pleasant 2D art amongst colorful background with largely recycled music from the HD remixes gives it an authentic Kingdom Hearts vibe and general spirit of the combat when boiled down to its core elements. By deciding to focus on streamlining the gameplay to mild exploration and fast-paced combat with swipes and taps, it leaves for the perfect type of pick up and play for a few minutes a day mobile title that mostly make up my preferred smartphone game experiences. Moving around is the usual drag your finger away from the character thing, running across sparkles on the ground representing loot, tapping chests with various goodies inside, and running into foes to initiate a turn-based battle system. Enemies' levels are generally showcased before a battle to help gauge roughly how strong they are, but isn't really comparable to the player's level, which is far less important overall past a certain point. You can tap on any foe on screen to attack it specifically, anywhere else to attack a random enemy, or swipe the screen to attack all foes simultaneously, with a less powerful sweep. Pretty simple stuff that's more important for the early game with limited options, when you don't need to try as hard. Because the game likes to reward players who can one-turn battles, as each quest in the game tends to have 3 mission objectives to also reach for, granting extra goodies and to keep you awake during half of the game before the power creep problem sinks in, which is either good or bad depending on your outlook on the game as a whole. More on this later. The target is always the foe that will end up in the current quest and will consistently be displayed to help guide players of any skill level. Exploration is typically rewarded as well as required for many mission objectives, but you do you. Some people are only playing this for the story, what little there is of it, while some of us have generally been playing off and on since global launch in April 2016, so I had much time to kill, constantly going back and completing objectives when I catch up to the current batch of story quests, but I digress. The player begins with 3000 HP, which isn't as impressive as it sounds, since you'll regularly be outmatched the further you play and in anything competitive. Again, power creep. Hitting and defeating enemies alongside specific orange-colored chests to give players attack prizes, drive-like orbs that charge the special attack gauge to use for the purposes of the medals that Keyblade wielders use here. As a refresher, the medals are the aforementioned forces from the future that allows the game to get away with using anything that's even remotely Kingdom Hearts related to any point in time, including anything Final Fantasy and Disney properties not actually featured in the series yet, but more as promotions for newer films like Moana and Incredibles 2, plus any cross-promotions with any other games from time to time. This is why you can see anything from the typical Disney characters rendered in-engine from any game in the series, and anything from Kingdom Hearts 1 all the way to Kingdom Hearts 3 showing up here. We just had Mickey's 90th anniversary that featured a super special awesome medal that was only available for one time that will never be seen again, and isn't that something you want? You may never get this chance ever again. If you don't hurry, you'll never have that nice HD render from his scene in 0.2 that this very series hasn't covered yet, but because that's the next video, but it's just so exclusive. Isn't that something you like, having things that nobody else does? Or more realistically, that very few can have? Well, you can always buy the chance to get them, but oh no, by the time this video's out, you have already missed it by a few weeks. Tough break. Sometimes you may even be guaranteed a medal with some mercy pulls, but what about those new medals that'll help you on a weekly/monthly basis? You just need to be the best, right? Well, just buy all the jewels you need to get more medals. All you need to do is be the very best like the person was last week, but this time it could be you. I'm sorry, I think I started going off on the sharp end of this double-edged sword. Though I guess both ends hurt unless you hold it a specific way, I guess that saying really does make sense. I will refrain from covering the infamous pay-to-win aspect of this game as best as I can to focus more on the story and basic gameplay here, but man, it's hard to avoid if I'm being honest with you guys. Just know that to be any good at this game, you either need to be extremely lucky, patient to earn the chance to be lucky, or be a dehumanizing whale that's able to spend hundreds of dollars for virtual trinkets that will inevitably be outdated within a year. Sure, there are exceptions to this, but just know the hate you see online for this game isn't all unwarranted. A good chunk of it is very fair, unfortunately. Just because I love Kingdom Hearts doesn't mean I have to like gacha games entirely. Anyways, back to the basics. Being a gacha game, which for those who aren't aware is a style of game that's mostly featuring randomized goodies, your ability to progress is dependent on your management of jewels, the in-game premium currency that buys you a multitude of things, specifically 10 medal draws to increase your medal pool and become more effective beyond the basic medals offered in-game. Playing the game now will get you much further than it was for us 2 years ago, almost 3, and if you're only playing this for the story, you can easily breeze through the majority of the content without having to think for a very long time. This is because medals have their own statistics, being one of 6 categories: attack, experience, boost, cost, evolve, and money. Attack medals are the ones you'll be most familiar with on screen here, as these are what you equip onto various keyblades, earn through gameplay progression naturally, and can place them into one of 5 slots when leveled up. Since most battles begin with the player's turn unless ambushed by specific enemies, the player has as many attacks as their keyblade allows, a minimum of 3 and a max of 5 once leveled up. Something brought up briefly in Birth by Sleep, Unchained Key goes all in on evolving keyblades. While Starlight is the default keyblade here, each Disney World grants you access to one of that world's keyblades. In this case, the dealing exclusive Season 1 content, Unchained Key offers Treasure Trove, Lady Luck, 3 Wishes, Olympia, and Divine Rose as returning keyblades for the main story quest and their respective returning Disney Worlds. Alongside Starlight, a specific set of special quests give powerful players the chance to obtain the Moogle Glory Keyblade as the other original Sword and Unchained Key. Each Keyblade can be upgraded with various items, such as loot with the higher levels requiring more limited drops as rewards for being a pay-to-win player, but batching focus up. Each Keyblade has 3 forms. The first or second, usually the ones seen on the other games returning Keyblades, are featured in, with a 4th being the 3rd form, but glowy for the highest levels. As you upgrade a Keyblade's level, it unlocks the 4th and 5th medal slots as well, as giving each slot a corresponding type between power, speed, or magic. The various red, green, and blue medals can also be either upright or reverse, the brighter and darker borders around each medal generally showcasing a protagonist or antagonist. Each slot gives different multiplier bonuses that increase as you level a Keyblade up that each individual medal uses to determine a player's attack and defense. A lot of mix and matching that gives a lot of leeway depending on the medals you have, for better or worse. Each medal is ranked on a 7-star system that typically changes the visuals on most non-special or exclusive medals, with some being pulled from official art and sometimes even including music, which is a nice touch, with Japan getting the extra layer of slightly creepy voice clips. Each comes with a special attack that you'll be abusing frequently if you have a good deck of medals. Each medal has a large number displayed during battle that corresponds to their cost, and as medals level up via evolved medals into higher ranks, they also cost more to equip, limiting early usage of the most OP medals you have. This means that you either have medals that can restore your special attack gauge, or being selective on their usage and rely on the bonuses from hitting and defeating Heartless alongside orange chests indicating their contents. This layer of strategy is more evident when you begin the game and are relying on the early medals and on tougher encounters, but again, power creep is a real thing. The term power creep refers to how the medals being offered now are generally much more powerful or useful than medals were earlier on in the game's life. Especially now, since it's how you keep people pulling for newer medals that may either be useful or have a character you really want to get because reasons. So, playing the game now with the amount of jewels you can gain from a fresh file, by the time you begin hitting a wall of basic medals can't easily overcome, and want to pull for battle medals with the free jewels that you've earned through normal gameplay or rewards and daily login bonuses, the sheer amount of medals in the pool guarantees you'll get something useful the earlier on in the story you are. Probability is in the newer player's favor the longer you wait to jump in on this game, if you even want to after this video is done and you've gotten half of what you need to know. Special attacks come in one of 3 varieties in how they target foes, being singular, all, or random. These all range between normal attacks, buffs that can heal HP, restore the special gauge by a certain amount, raising various tiers of attacks and defense by types, lowering specific defenses, and attacks with corresponding debuffs. I'm kind of flying through the gameplay details because there are way more qualified sites and channels to explain the minutiae if you're really interested, and it's kind of basic stuff, because I'm just covering the basics as best as I can so I can pretend this is half of a review, while really just talking about the story and how I think the game is still generally okay, all things considered, with a major asterisk. I'll go into some specifics in the Union Cross video to pad that one out, detailing things like special attack bonus and Nova, but for now I will stay focused and move on. Each medal also can be equipped with a skill that helps raise attack and defenses, inflicting status effects like sleep and paralysis, and also where the coveted second chance ability lies to survive otherwise fatal enemy turns. Medals can also carry traits, which are passive skills that help boost stats, increase lux, and help resist specific ailments or be more effective against certain enemies. All in all, this is pretty much what you need to know, alongside the fact that the 3 types of attack medals work on a rock, paper, scissors mentality. Power beats speed, speed trumps magic, magic conquers power, with a handy weapons triangle-like diagram, helping with colors at a glance. The game now has an auto-battle option that takes a lot of the micromanaging out of battles if your deck is quite good for most basic fights, so it's nice for me to redo older quests that I didn't one turn before. It's also worth noting that after you defeat a certain amount of enemies depending on the type of quest you're doing, a raid boss will appear to override the furthest story quest that you have available. These are typically boss-style heartless that are meant to impede your plot progression, and which you can get assistance with for friends on the tougher ones. Every time you beat a raid boss, it levels up the next time you face it, and an extra medal can be slotted in by various friends, as well as giving you a 6th move in battle with any medals they equip, which can either be great or a freaking Donald because the player never checked what a friend medal is. More on the multiplayer aspects in the 10th video, but with most of the basics out of the way here, I can return to focus on what many of you were actually watching this for, the story and how it's finally moving after I arbitrarily stopped it once it finally began rolling. Sorry, we're back to what I usually do now. I left off after Ephemer's friendly talk with Master Ava before meeting up with the player the next day. Waking up from a dream where the player went along with Ephemer to go further into the clock tower before vanishing into a gust of dandelions, Chirithy remarks about the dream, something a dream eater might know something about, huh? Trying to persuade the player to steer clear of the tower, Chirithy vaguely remarks on how the Foretellers seem to be disagreeing lately, informing the previous scene on why Master Ava seemed to be in a dour mood. Deciding to search for Ephemer regardless of the warnings, the player searches around the tower, asking other wielders if they've seen him and learning that Master Ava has been seen recruiting capable wielders regardless of union affiliation. All in all, it's kinda ridiculous padding. The player has been with Ephemer in the waterway, even hears about them conversing with Master Ava frequently enough to have been sighted regularly, yet the game has the player going around asking other Keyblade wielders about Ephemer, one leading into a friend who knows Master Ava all the way in Agrabah, only to have them track them down in that godforsaken desert, only for the advice to be, well, I see her around the tower, but I don't know how to get in, which is something the player already knows, only then does the player decide to go back where they actually were and just go further inside. This game sometimes, man. Anyways, once inside, they run across none other than Master Ava herself, the player explaining that they've been looking for her not only because of the rumors around Daybreak Town, but also due to her conversing with Ephemer, who she admits knowing well. Once they say Ephemer told them to meet them in their dream, the player and Chirithy are surprised to see Master Ava draw her Keyblade. Testing the player for being on the right track, but frustratingly unwilling to divulge any more information on the matter, the player battles the Foreteller, evidently proving their worth to the Keyblade Master. After giving the rumors some grain of truth when she praises the potential of the player, Master Ava also comments on the amount of sadness in their heart, saying that it can lead to darkness if they aren't careful. Motioning to Chirithy as a good protector, being a spirit and all, perhaps, she reiterates that this area is strictly off-limits and lets the player return home for the day. Remarking on how she finally met the friend Ephemer mentioned, we cut back to a flashback to when he was about to enter beyond the waterway when a shadowy figure shows up to abruptly end the scene. Back home, Chirithy remarks to the sleeping player that they never expected to face a Foreteller, Master Ava agreeing, having slipped into the room to chat with Chirithy. Asking if he showed the player the Dream Eater says that it wasn't his doing, Ava concluding that it must have been Ephemer himself then. Remarking that he's in an unchained state, title drop, the Keyblade Master says that Ephemer's close to the truth now and is currently in another realm, something that the player must be closer to if Ephemer tried and was successful in contacting. Before disappearing, Ava tells the spirit to protect the player from nightmares, further throwing a machete into the intellectual thicket any First Kingdom Hearts fan will be chopping away at with this vaguely inferred information. Later on, the player is given a Bracelet of Light for a mission to defeat Heartless in a Corridor of Darkness. This is seemingly to protect wielders entering into the Realm of Darkness for a short time without Keyblade armor. It's worth mentioning that this bracelet is different from the Power Bangle that was given to Keyblade wielders way back in Quest 34, that unlocked a gameplay mechanic by a different Chirithy. Perhaps it was the more sinister, darker Chirithy? Later on, when Chirithy asks why the Keyblade wielders were sent into a Corridor of Darkness so early to take on tougher Heartless, the player's Foreteller reveals that they sent them in there earlier than intended to build up their resistance to darkness. Using it as an opportunity to hasten their training, the Foretellers are worried that the darkness is approaching quicker than they'd anticipated, needing as many warriors fighting for the light as possible to combat the upcoming wave of darkness. I semi-bring both up because there's a later section that details with a Keyblade wielder from a different union that absolutely refuses to realize the whole motto of the series with the line, "Friends aren't my power," which is absolutely a deliberate crack at Sora. It always makes me smirk, especially considering the events that are being set up with a certain great battle involving darkness and key-shaped swords. The looming threat of dealing with such a major event in the series' lore is the entire driving force for us Kingdom Hearts fans here. Disguise it as a fairy tale all you want, but just like Days and Birth by Sleep, most of us are waiting for the other shoe to drop with characters we know aren't around in the present, especially after seeing the outcome of the Badlands. Through 25 quests, this curmudgeonly Keyblade wielder learns the value of friendship, saying despite how he was pushing away his friends in an effort to lessen those who kept getting hurt during missions, some still stuck around. The lesson ingrained in his head, it's sometimes charming to see a predictable story beat go through its natural conclusion when you get a line like that to remember it by. This brief side story ends with Chirithy giving the Star Wars thing about fear leading to anger, anger leading to the hate, and hate leading to suffering spiel. Though, to be fair, it is more that anger is a pathway to darkness that the player didn't allow to get the better of anyone in this situation, which is nice reincorporation of the general themes of Kingdom Hearts in general in an otherwise fluffy filler arc. After another round of Disney mundanity, the plot kicks back in after a trip to the underworld in Olympus Coliseum has the player relaxing on the fountain, Chirithy being his characteristically cheerful self and remarking how if the player took a break, the other unions would bridge the gap. This was funny to me since as a Wolves player in Global, we've been consistently untouchable since the game launched for whatever reason. I picked it because I enjoyed Alpha's design and the whole Fox theme, but hey, turns out I enjoy the Union Leader as we happen to have the most players. Anywho, this prompts a snappily dressed girl to pop in asking why that matters, which is a good meta point to bring up since the game almost seems self-aware of the type of gacha title it is, but I'll address that next time as well. Introducing herself as Skuld, she proceeds to say that all the Union's goals are to protect the light and that it shouldn't be a competition at the expense of the good intentions. Weekly calculations are done comparing the Lux collected between all 5 unions, Volps and Unicornus being the consistent top 2 unions in Global. Recognizing the player thanks to Ephemer, Skuld reveals that they used to be in the same party shortly after she became a Keyblade wielder before he suddenly quit one day. Similar to the player, Ephemer contacted Skuld within a dream she had and told her to find the player, hoping to meet them and make sense of what's going on. After sharing that they both were contacted by Ephemer, Chirithy tries to dissuade them from going back to meet him beyond the waterway before a major clash is heard nearby. Running towards the sounds, the trio witness the Union leaders of Anguis and Ursus fighting each other across the rooftops. As they wonder why 2 Foretellers would be clashing with each other, Skuld continues that in her dream, Ephemer told her that the end of the world was approaching. Worried that the world is about to disappear like her friend has, the player speaks up and suggests they throw caution to the wind and go back to the tower to figure out what's going on. Crossing a bridge on their way to the tower, they run across 3 Heartless appearing from the lanes between, with the disturbing ability to speak. Demanding Lux from Skuld and the player, they fight off the humanoid Darklings before the other Chirithy pops in with a darker color scheme. The Spirit Chirithy calls out that the other has been tainted by darkness, resulting in its new moniker of Nightmare Chirithy, the Dream Eaters having a bit of a short back and forth for a while about how light and darkness are 2 parts of the same coin. It doesn't take long for the Nightmare to reveal that the 3 Darklings were once Keyblade wielders, a result of it taking away their looks to that they wouldn't fight over it, and instead have them embrace their own strength via the power of darkness, instead of using metals from the Book of Prophecy. Once again spelling out that darkness has a habit of worming into weak-hearted individuals and granting them more power, Chirithy demands to know who the Nightmare's wielder is, since it's going against their teachings. Scoffing that the world is something you have to experience instead of being taught, it remarks that their wielder is closer than they think before disappearing. I wonder if those 3 Heartless were the 3 Keyblade wielders earlier. Finally making their way back to the same clock gears the player abandoned so many weeks ago, Chirithy gives the "I've got a bad feeling about this" spiel, but thankfully both Skuld and the player convince him to lead them to the Fortellers Chamber regardless. Making their way upwards, combating a swarm of Heartless along the way, the trio finally arrives in the empty chamber. Expecting more, they are then met by the Unicorn's Foreteller, Skuld and Chirithy apologizing profusely for entering an area that was explicitly off-limits despite searching for Ephemer. Master Era then casually states that he caught a Keyblade wielder here earlier, the player speaking up and claiming that he is their friend and the entire reason that they're here now. Saying Ephemer was gathering Lux for a purpose not aligned with his union, the Foreteller says that he disposed of the Keyblade wielder, Skuld shaken to their core, and Chirithy trying to put all the blame on himself, apologizing for the outcome. Despite the sad turn of events, the player finally rises up to the occasion, actually acting like a protagonist and channeling their inner Sora. The player proceeds to confirm that they have gathered Lux across 6 worlds for their union, never questioning why and even having to fight friends in the process. Bringing up Ephemer, who despite the player knowing him for such a short time, was able to leave a big mark upon them. Even though he broke an earlier promise, Ephemer was still their friend, and the player describes how that they were sad, angry, hurt, all things that may mean that they have darkness in their heart. Regardless, the player is adamant on avenging their friend, drawing their Keyblade as something they must do, an intense battle ensuing with Master Era ultimately the winner. Suddenly ending up in the waterway, Master Ira congratulates on the player's valor, revealing themselves to actually be Master Ava and remarking on the wielder's strength of heart. Mentioning how the battle and scene before were simply projections after healing the player, the Foreteller explains that this was all in an effort to test various potential Keyblade wielders regardless of union. Confirming that Ephemer was correct in warning that the world would soon end, Master Ava was gathering exceptional wielders to survive beyond the encroaching darkness to rebuild the world, the fairy tale seemingly coming true, validating Kairu's grandma. Asking about Ephemer's whereabouts, Master Ava states that she selected him specifically to help lead her so-called Dandelions in her stead in the world after the Keyblade War. He was selected because he knew that there was more to the world than he was being told and sought out the truth, which led him to this apparent unchained state and waiting outside of this world. Relieved that Ephemer is fine, Master Ava stresses that this world is not, and that the Dandelions are those who will survive once the world is swallowed up by darkness. The Nightmare Chirithy and its corresponding wielder are enough proof why the Foreteller chose the members of the Dandelions to be those with a strong resistance to darkness. While Skuld accepts Master Ava's offer to become a Dandelion, the player then asks what will happen to the others, prompting the official mentioning of the Keyblade War. The Foreteller admits that the conflict and resulting end of the world is inevitable, aligning itself with lore explained in 3D, which we will get to soon enough. The player asks to think about their answer, Master Ava understanding while asking them to keep mum on the whole future apocalypse thing. Outside on the fountain, when Chirithy asks why the player didn't jump at the chance to see Ephemer again, the playable protagonist explains that while he is an important friend, so are the others who have helped them in their union and beyond, and they simply cannot abandon them if most of them are fated to be dragged into an inevitable bad end. Skuld then shares an experience I can sympathize with, another meta-commentary the game's occasionally very good at. When she became a Keyblade wielder, she was so excited that she started up a party that nobody wanted to join. I feel that. Eventually, Ephemer joined her, and for a while it was just them before other wielders finally joined them. When all of their busy schedules led to them talking less and less, one day Ephemer left the party claiming that Skuld no longer needed them around. After a while, the players eventually lost interest and left her alone, which is when Skuld realized that she was fine on her own. Thanking the player for allowing her to see that Ephemer never forgot about her, since he also reached out to the player, she leaves to join the Dandelions. What now follows is a scene that basically ends Kingdom Hearts Unchained Key as far as I'm concerned, since there aren't any major plot developments that occurred after this and before the release of Kingdom Hearts HD 2.8 Final Chapter Prologue. While I'm skipping over this for now, note how Skuld is in the crowd here, allowing me to properly shift gears and cover what I consider the 9th title in the series after Unchained Key. Being the 3rd HD collection, 2.8 features the expected Dream Drop Distance HD, but the now expected movie is a complement to Unchained Key here. While it's shown as the 3rd option, I do believe it slots nicely after 3D and or the first 555 story quests of Unchained Key. Before we shift, pride compels me to let you guys know that the opening of back cover seems to show the events of Unchained Key as a condensed recap, and at first glance you'd be correct. Upon further inspection though, you may see events that catch up to Skuld's decision to join the Dandelions that go beyond what I just covered for you guys. This includes the player preventing 2 other Keyblade wielders fighting each other before switching to the more interesting scene of the Nightmare Chirithy undergoing a monster transformation before being defeated and fading into darkness. The final scenes show Master Ava facing a member in a black coat, because we can't escape that fashion statement no matter the timeline, before the Keyblade War officially begins, with scores of wielders facing each other. The player is then shown being beat by the Ursus Foreteller before clashing with Master Ira, eventually falling as multiple hearts begin floating upwards, Chirithy joining the player as they are enveloped by the welcoming light of Kingdom Hearts Key back cover logo. Words detailing the basics of the story flank the images, much of which is going to be addressed soon in the actual coverage of back cover. This was covering the events of the original Kingdom Hearts Key, which I will not cover here but in the 10th video. I felt that I needed to give you guys a heads up and cover my bases regardless. There is a method to my madness, I swear, so let's enter the 3rd chapter of this video and delve into pure story stuffs of this figurative book.
So that makes you the indisposable number 7. Huh. Come on, it's simple. U6 plus me is 7. Wait, don't tell me I don't count.
No.
Here, take it.
In the Master's playful and mischievous way, he gave his apprentice Lushu a very important role. What seemed like a simple task was the element that would connect all of the events to come.
As the shortest of these films on the remix collections, Kingdom Hearts Key back cover gets right to the point. Presenting itself as focusing around the Foretellers of the Five Unions, back cover's intention is to fill in some of the background events depicted around Unchained Key. To me, the Union leaders always seemed a bit standoffish and very no-nonsense in most of their appearances to the player, but back cover does a great deal to humanize them. Its presentation is definitely boosted in not only having new pieces of music, but obviously a test run of the new engine that the series adopted for their first two HD debuts. I'll avoid commenting on the visuals for now, but just know that it was exciting for me to see how the new engine would handle cutscenes. The story of that cover mainly revolves around the Master of Masters and his 6 apprentices, 5 of which are the Union leaders players will be familiar with from Unchained Key. Sprinkled throughout the narrative are separate case-of scenes where the Master of Masters gives each of the 6 a specific task, so that's how I'll tackle these. The first scene shown a few minutes ago covers the event that would tie everything together, so we'll return to that when appropriate. For now, we get a recap of the gist of the story that took Unchained Key way too many hours to tell. Chirithy narrates the exposition. Back when the world was one of the age of fairy tales, the Master had an eye that could gaze into the future. Using this knowledge of the future, he gave 5 of his 6 apprentices a copy of the Book of Prophecies, alongside a task for the 6 of them. The 5 Foretellers are given names so everyone's on the same page. The leaders of Unicornus, Anguis, Ursus, Volps, and Leopardus are the Keyblade Masters Ira, Envy, Aced, Gula, and Ava respectively, with Lushu being the previously unknown 6th apprentice. They each wear masks corresponding to their unions, while both the Master of Masters and Lushu are wearing the iconic black coats of Organization 13 fame, so we don't get any clear faces here, making you wonder why they're all remaining anonymous. Their roles are as follows. Ira was tasked by the Master to lead the 5 unions in his absence, with Aced's role being to support their new leader. Envy was told to watch over the 5 of them with a fair eye, while Gula's objective was to discover the mystery behind the Book of Prophecies. This leaves Ava, whom we learned earlier was successful in selecting exceptional Keyblade wielders to help populate the world after, leaving the mysterious Lushu, who was the first to be given his role with watching the other 5 apprentices as they went about their missions before disappearing. Not long after that, the Master himself vanished, dimmed, and faded without a trace. This left the events of the player and the other Keyblade wielders to join one of the newly formed 5 unions under the Foretellers in Unchained Key, gathering looks to help protect the light from the incoming darkness. With most of the setup now out of the way, much of it known if you played or are familiar with Unchained Key or made it this far into the video, we now deal with the politics behind the masked masters and fill in some of the much needed context behind the purpose of the first season that is Unchained Key. From here, the story jumps back before the Master disappeared as he gave each of his apprentices their role, so let's get right into this background story.
Counting on you to keep the others calm. Okay?
Huh? Disappear?
Vanish? Dim? Fade? I don't know how to explain it. It's just hypothetical talk.
Okay.
Skipping over Lushu for now, the first case revolves around Ira as the Master gives him the role of new leader as they discuss the final passage in the Book of Prophecies. You learn very quickly that the Master of Masters is quite the enigmatic fellow, as he doesn't always act the same around everyone in his one-on-ones with his own apprentices. Ira is very much the stoic leaderly type, as evidenced by the Master hoping that he'll calmly lead the others if he, quote, suddenly disappears. Obviously questioning why he'd say that, the Master remains pretty vague, confident that they really can't change the future, something 3D brought up. Instead, the Master goes on to reiterate that this world is protected by the great light of Kingdom Hearts, and were the light to fade, all the smaller worlds comprising the larger world would be swallowed up in darkness. When Ira claims that he bestowed upon them Keyblades to spread the teachings to protect Kingdom Hearts, the Master denies that Keyblades were made to protect the eponymous light, and that the world is fated to fade into darkness. Rather than trying to prevent the inevitable, the Master instead suggests that they focus on what comes after, Ira volunteering to help try and prevent the upcoming apocalypse by gathering Keyblade wielders in an attempt to save as many as possible. Curiously, the Master makes the glib remark that the world can't be saved by 7 people, that number being more significant given the events of 3D. He then wishes Ira luck in his endeavor regardless, fast-forwarding to one of the more important plot points of Unchained Key. While the various unions were busy gathering Lux by defeating Heartless, Ira proclaims that there is a traitor among them and brings out a Dark Chirithy as proof of a tainted wielder. A quick flashback shows that it was indeed the Master of Masters who created the Chirithy, running over to quick explanation of the two various breeds of Dream Eater. While the spirits are meant to be helpful guides for every Keyblade wielder, a nightmare is evidence of its wielder having their heart clouded by darkness, and would then plant darkness in the hearts of others, which neatly leads back to the present. While each Foreteller denies that any of them are tainted, Gula even suggesting that by simply bringing out their Chirithy to prove that they aren't this traitor, Envy brings up that that wouldn't be difficult for any of them to summon any Chirithy from their own unions. Furthermore, Ava brings up that it may not even be one of theirs, but any of the Keyblade wielders in their unions. Ira shoots down the probability by mentioning that the power bangles that the Keyblade wielders were given by the Dark Chirithy early on in Quest 34. Ava clarifies that they agree to allow the wielders to use these bangles, which can collect dark energy, while Ira counters that using that power is the equivalent of using darkness itself. We go back to the philosophical debate on how using darkness, even if it isn't your own and for good intentions, makes you just as dangerous as one who embraces the darkness themselves. Ascetic using Ira's tactic of attempting somebody to out themselves as a traitor was pretty foolish. All it did was plant those seeds of doubt, all but Ira and Envy remaining in the Fortellers Chamber as she asks their new leader why he brought this up so openly. Ira then brings up the matter of the lost page, a missing part of their copies of the Book of Prophecy, pointing out that this nightmare incident was not in his book. Envy confirming that she too doesn't have this incident in her copy, Ira concludes that the one who has likely turned by darkness is in the possession of this missing page, casting his suspicion towards the remaining three Foretellers as likely having the complete text. Envy promises to continue keeping an eye on all of them, suggesting that it may have been the Master's plan to give one of them the lost page, but with him gone, all she can do is continue fulfilling her role. And just like that, we have a huge chunk of Unchained Key explained, including the Nightmare Chirithy's early action with the power bangles as well as the Traitor talk. Flashing back to when the Master gave her the task of the Mediator, Envy was uncertain about her ability to maintain order between 5 separate unions without the Master or Lushu's presence. That mischievous and playful way that the Master acts, as Chirithy put it, makes it hard for Envy to decipher when the Master is joking, before he mentions that while change is scary, it's inevitable if one is to keep moving forward, lest they be left alone. This is the scene that officially introduces the May Your Heart Be Your Guiding Key motto that the Master apparently says all the time to them, which is Sora's core MO of following whatever his heart feels is right.
It looks to me like the Master made the wrong choice.
Wait, where do you think you're going?
I think we're done here. I trust you'll keep us all updated.
I hope we can all resolve this soon.
A few days later, the 3 other ostracized Foretellers have met up on Ased's request to form an alliance between them in order to combat the darkness, believing in pooling their strength to have every advantage of fighting back the darkness. This all stems from his disappointment in Ira's leadership despite Ased's given role to support their leader in the Master's absence, especially after his accusations of a traitor among the 5, with Ased refusing to believe that there's a traitor at all. With Gula agreeing that Ira has no solid evidence to tie any one of them to being a traitor, Ava suggests that there's something Ira hasn't told them, Ased continuing to vent his frustrations on the mystery. The Ursus leader continues with his belief that they should instead combine the unions in order to combat the darkness instead of wasting time trying to figure out who the traitor is, Ava chiming in by saying that alliances were forbidden by the Master. Countering that with their old teacher gone, things must change, Gula asked if the intention is to combine forces in order to force Ira out, Ased brushing it off since Ira won't change his mind and he'd rather combat the darkness directly. While Gula agrees to join Ased, but on the strict condition that his union is left out of this, Ava remains hesitant, wishing to obey their master's teachings and remain separate, something Ased understands. Gula then asks if the other 2 Foretellers know about this alliance, the reply being that while Ased did not bring this up to Ira, he did ask Envy, who walks in at that very moment. Gathering what's going on, Envy accuses Ased of going too far, being more confrontational on Ased going against their teachings. Sticking to her role as mediator, Envy stands firm in believing that they should keep the 5 unions separate in order to keep the balance of power, since more power tends to beckon the darkness. When she accuses Ased of being tainted by darkness, he counters that Envy could be the traitor, as she reports everything they do back to Ira, the rift between the Foretellers growing, which worries Ava. Later on, the cutscene with her and Ephemer occurs, fully voiced and contextualizing the conversation pretty well, humanizing the Volps leader even further and giving more weight to the static scene. Starting earlier than Unchained Keys did, with the context about Ava's source of sadness laid bare, Ava tells Ephemer that while the Master told their unions to be separate, she instead brings up that Ephemer expressed interest to solve the mysteries of the world. In order to do that and follow what their hearts tell them, Ava begins to agree that it's right to question what they've been told, the scene continuing as detailed earlier. This includes Ephemer's curiosity on her copy of the book, mentioning the player, and Ava adamant on fulfilling her role. It's much easier to see the playful banter between Ava and Ephemer when it's voiced, since Ephemer was always likable in the same way that Sora was in being an honest kid, but it was nice to see Ava with much more of a personality and not as stoic as she came across to me in Unchained Key. The wonders of voice acting, ladies and gentlemen. Returning to Envy reporting the incident to Ira, the Anguis leader suggests that while Aced is indeed forming an alliance, she doesn't believe that Aced's heart has been tainted by darkness given his urgency to face the darkness instead of turning on Ira. While they both wish to convince Aced to rescind his proposal, Envy insists she will be the one to do it, since Ira would only add fuel to the fire beneath the other Foreteller. Agreeing, Envy also decides to report back to Ira less in order to prove to Aced that the duo isn't working against him and arousing more suspicions. Ira agrees as he looks over his book, opening it Japanese style and showing fans the recognizable pictures of the Kingdom Key and a dark side, largely covering the first half of Unchained Key's events. We now jump ahead a few months, no doubt flying through all the filler fluff in Unchained Key while the unions were gathering Lux. Returning to Aced and Gula, the Leopardus leader decides to dissolve their alliance on the account that Aced was unable to woo anyone else over to their side, and the fact that there hasn't been any impending darkness to fight against or nefarious intents recently. While Aced flares up asking why they separate when they still haven't figured out who the traitor is yet, Gula lets slip that while Envy was the one who told him to split up, Gula himself agreed and made the decision on his own. Remarking how he can't trust anyone but himself, Gula leaves a fuming Aced who turns his rage towards Envy for her interference. Left alone and feeling betrayed, Aced recounts his role that the Master gave him to support Ira as the new leader should he one day vanish. Despite Aced's reservations on being under Ira, the Master picks up upon his apprentice's disappointment on both his possible disappearance and playing second fiddle to Ira. Pointing out that while Ira is one to sit and stew upon decisions, the Master suggests that it's up to Aced to push him into action, suggesting that if one day Ira's leadership is called into question, then who other than Gula should step up to fulfill his true role. A year after the Master's disappearance, Aced finally decides to act upon this true role of his and attacks Envy, the two Foretellers clashing as seen in Unchained Key by the player in Skuld. Displaying more destruction than what was depicted on the mobile game, Aced is steadfast in his decision to defy the Master's teachings in order to protect the light and avoid his prophetic end of the world. The two Masters showcase gravity and water-based powers, while Gula looks on silently before calling Ava, following her Chirithy over to the current clash. When Envy proclaims Aced the traitor, Ava refuses to believe the accusation, looking over to Gula who summons his Keyblade to support Envy. Reluctantly doing the same, the Foretellers fight while the camera cuts away from the 3v1 battle to showcase the devastating aftermath. Showcasing Gula in an alley holding a page, it quickly becomes apparent with the corresponding flashback that the Master gave Gula the lost page, his role of finding the traitor bared. Coming to the conclusion that the one who deviates from their given role is likely the traitor, something the Master's miffed was taken away from him dramatically revealing it to Gula, the Master ultimately agrees with the assertion. Despite the excessive gesticulation that often accompanies this series, and more so with the Master, he then seems to get serious when instructing his apprentice to act normal when figuring out who the traitor is. Explaining away his distrustful nature at his role, Gula finds a severely wounded Aced in their meeting spot months prior to when they first formed their alliance of convenience. After disclosing his role of finding the traitor and pointing his Keyblade at Aced, Gula bears the brunt of the larger man's rage, furious that Gula knew that there was a traitor and yet stood by and did nothing as it began tearing the five of them apart. Ava rushes in shortly afterwards, witnessing Aced overpowering Gula and attempting to finish him off. Pleading to stay his hand, Aced halts his attack, limping off as Ava helps Gula up. Outside in the rain, Aced slumps against the wall when spotting Ira, giving in to his fate if their leader is here to finish him off. Claiming that this is not what brought him here today, as it isn't their mission to change the events of the future, Ira still welcomes Aced as a friend. Calling Aced one of the five lights, as they can't bear to lose any at this point, Ira is then told by the other Foreteller that Gula is using knowledge from a lost page. The Unicorn's leader then strikes out looking for Gula in order to discover the contents of the missing passages from their books. Days pass to find Envy and Ava having an argument, the former accusing the latter of training Keyblade wielders in secret before Ava reveals that it was her role the entire time. Recoiling a bit, Envy is told that Ava refused to give up Gula when Era showed up with a scary look in his eye. Recounting events, Ava details her actions. Fearing the worst would happen, she used the Chirithy to help keep Gula hidden, returning to converse with him on what's going on. Gula elaborates on the lost page and how its contents detail the traitor, yet the passage was vague enough to only describe the individual as the one who bears the sigil.
It talks about the one who bears the sigil. That's it. So, I don't know what to make of it, to be honest.
At a loss as to its meaning, Gula intends on asking the Master directly by summoning Kingdom Hearts. When Ava brings up that it is forbidden to do such, Gula insists that the only way to bring the Master back is to break his rules, forcing their Master's return. Asking for her help in gathering enough Lux to go through with his last-ditch plan, Ava declines by stating that they have no idea how Kingdom Hearts would affect the world, as it was forbidden for a reason, Gula walking off on his own. Returning to the present, Envy states that it explains why Era and Aset are gathering Lux, to balance out Gula's collection. Stating his arms race is the wrong type of balancing, since such a collection of power can lead to the hastening of darkness, Envy declares that they too must gather Lux in an attempt to delay the upcoming Keyblade War. Neither are happy with the situation, but they are left with little choice if they don't dissuade everyone from hoarding the light for themselves. We then address the final Union leader's flashback with the Master, detailing Ava's role of being the last ray of hope in the inevitable end of the world. Lacking any sense of theatrics, the Master instructs Ava to ignore the concept of unions and any battles in the future. This leads to her known task of gathering Keyblade wielders with potential to save them from the looming war, setting up the Dandelions to then scatter them to another world to help keep the light alive during their darkest hour. We then cut back to the final scene of Unchained Key, so I'll let this voice cutscene play, curiously sans Skuld.
Will turn their weapons on their allies, for the sake of loyalty to their own unions. To be honest, I don't know how far I can guide all of you. What you must remember is that anyone can lose themselves to the darkness. However, there will be no winners. Everything will be lost. Except all of you who are the seeds of hope. When the time comes, and there is war, you mustn't fight, but instead you must fly away from here to the world outside. This training is to help you fulfill this crucial task. The future is in all your hands, as is the world's light. May your hearts be your guiding key.
And now I finally cut back to the mysterious Sixth Apprentice. The case of Lucio is split as the book ends of back cover. Back at the beginning of the movie, the Master is inducting Lucio as the indisposable number 7, before self-deprecating about how he might not be counted as one of its members. This is the first introduction to the quirkiness of the animated Master of Masters, Lucio being the polar opposite in his reserved mannerisms. He is then given the familiar-looking Keyblade of Master Xehanort by the Master, remarking that recurring blue eyes seen in a few of the weapons around the series. When Lucio asks about the gazing eye, the Master says it's not what the Keyblade is called, and responds with no name. When asked what to call it, skipping over the naming schemes of both, the Master reveals that the eye in the Keyblade is his own, something Lucio reacts with appropriate shock and mild disgust. Lucio's role from the Master is to pass on his Keyblade to his future apprentice, and to keep passing it down so he can witness the future and supposedly transcribe it into the Book of Prophecies. Putting 2 and 2 together, Lucio realizes, and is enthusiastically told by the Master, that he was successful in his mission before he even started. As per accordance to how this was successful, the Master explains that Lucio is to go forward without a copy of the Book of Prophecies in order to avoid causing any time paradoxes. Insisting he's successful in his mission, considering the Book of Prophecies is a thing, the Master sends his apprentice off with his Keyblade and a mysterious black box. Prompting the obvious "what's in the box" line, the Master tells Lucio that he is to never open it, naturally piquing his apprentice's curiosity and the audience's.
I can't have you causing any temporal paradoxes. But hey, we both know you'll do just fine without it, right?
Do I really have to go alone? What about the others?
Minor details, so don't sweat it. For now, you that Keyblade, and this box need to stay out of sight. Just watch with your own eyes, and my eye, of course, as things unfold between the others. Then, when the time is right, go off and do your thing.
What's in it?
It's a secret. And, well, you see, the thing is, you can never, ever open it.
Great, now I really want to know.
All right. I'll indulge you. But this secret stays between the two of us, and you have to promise never to open the box.
I promise. But why?
You'll see.
May my heart be my guiding key.
Now isn't that a frustrating cliffhanger? This is where I do the usual lore and scenario mysteries thing, which is largely going to focus on what international players will be familiar with by playing through the first season, that is Unchained Key, and by watching that cover here for some background information. This one's going to be a bit lighter since I will also cover more in the 10th video detailing the second season of Key's story, but it's largely focused around the events that back cover shed some light on here. First off, it was nice to get some context and personality injected into the otherwise very stoic-seeming Union leaders. I don't know how it felt for others, but their large absence from the game was almost distracting, exacerbated a lot by how much gameplay/filler fluff is present in the title. I get it, that's part of the whole gameplay loop that it has, but the story is frankly being spread across way too many missions. Were the events of Key played in a proper Kingdom Hearts title with a clear beginning, middle, and end, we likely wouldn't be having this particular discussion on the legendarily poor pacing issues it currently has. Don't get me wrong, as a Disney fan, I enjoy a lot of the main plots of the worlds here being more accurate to their source films than the other games are, but it is at the cost of spinning your wheels for hundreds of story missions. Depending on how you play the game as well, you can go days or weeks without any significant story beats, possibly forgetting what the narrative drive was when Unchained Key drip feeds the bits many diehard fans are even playing it for. I'll lay off the game mechanics for now, since I will focus more on the nitty-gritty briefly in the Union Cross video, so back to the story bits. Giving the Union leader's actual character was a good start, but it still comes across with the same basic problem. In this game's story, Master Ava is the most prominent leader due to her role in gathering of the Dandelions that the player themselves found themselves wrapped up in. Even then, her purpose as the here's the important parts of the plot and why you're doing this is a bit detached, even for me who was a member of Volps. Little did I know that I happened to pick the one leader with the most screen time, since she always did come across as the one with the least amount of ulterior motives, simply because she got more time dedicated to her before this. In back cover, all 5 of the Foretellers do balance each other out in terms of color coding, personalities, and obviously animal themes, but the audience is left with many lingering questions. Namely, why animals? Why do they trust their master so? How did Daybreak Town come into being? Why do they trust such an aloof master? Why do all of their Keyblades have that gazing eye? Why is the one in No Name the Master's Eye? Can he only see the future in that one? And many more, which are not really answered here. I don't know about you guys, but did you deduce who the traitor was? Because some of us, myself included, have a sneaking suspicion that none of the Foretellers were actually traitors, at least not with what were presented in Unchained Key and now back cover. Most of the conflicts in the film here stem from the 5 trying to fulfill their respective roles to help prepare for the inevitable Keyblade War, while dealing with this traitor and by extension the lost page and its contents. Ira was determined to find out who the traitor was. As the appointed leader, Envy had to quell the resulting arguments and imbalances of power. Aset took it upon himself to lead where he believed Ira failed. Ava tried to avoid all conflicts and focus on gathering Keyblade wielders to survive the inevitable doomsday, and Gula grew desperate trying to determine who the traitor was. If you ask me, one wouldn't seem in the wrong to suspect that maybe the Master of Masters set the whole thing up. Having literal eyewitness testimony of future events from his eerie blue gazing eye thanks to Lucio having passed down No Name across the timeline to write the Book of Prophecies is quite the boon to have. Also dangerous, since writing prophecies and inevitabilities can be a very thin ice to tread writing-wise, especially when inserting it into a series that didn't seem to display such matters beforehand. Add to that the time travel was officially introduced in 3D, and Kingdom Hearts has officially solidified itself as Metal Gear levels of convoluted, and I just adore it all the more for that, to be honest. Because I'm not kidding. I truly love how crazy the story's gotten 9 titles in now. I'm not defending how it was presented exactly. It'd be dishonest saying that splitting up the narrative of what was originally the sole 8th title into a PC game, a smartphone game that's since been split into 2 seasons, which is but isn't quite a remake of the first game, alongside now an hour-long supplementary film that is what most people are going to actually watch, isn't exactly the most coherent way to tell your story. Heck, it's arguably pretty frustrating. I'm partially making this series of videos because of how scattered the storyline of Kingdom Hearts is, still solely due to this singular fragmented game, even just spread across the PS4 games and now one smartphone title. Because as someone who's up to date with the mobile version, it does not cover everything that the browser game did, at least not in its entirety, and those expecting back cover to be a summary of that game will be just as confused as those expecting the Fantastic Beasts films to be a summary of its corresponding supplementary book that it's only loosely based upon. So to keep it simple, I focused on what most will have experienced if they're playing what's currently available worldwide. And let's be honest, back cover is only meaningful to those who are invested in the events of the various incarnations of Key, Unchained and otherwise. As a standalone film, it's woefully inadequate compared to the treatments Days and Recoded received, since those are telling actually complete stories with definite beginnings and endings that easily slot into the timeline, and is in the current present with Sora. Unchained Key takes a bit more to dig into what's really happening, as a lot of hints are present here but haven't been paid off by the time 2.8 and thus back cover released in late 2016 and early 2017 depending on your region. For instance, it's an obviously tough sell to make fans who don't play Unchained Key to care about the Foretellers, and some who do still might not care since only Ava got any meaningful development in the game. I find it interesting simply because I'm neck deep into the lore of this series, as evidenced by these insanely long videos, but I'm not blind. This nonsense comes across as complete gobbledygook for the uninitiated, and that's not an undeserved criticism for the 8th and 9th entries here, because right now, as of this point in the story, most of these questions are not answered, and only watching back cover will leave you more confused than enlightened if you wanted a complete story. Take, for instance, the identity of the traitor. The passage read, "the one bearing the sigil," which seems like a reference to the recusant sigil from Dream Drop Distance, the now familiar X-shaped crest put upon Sora during his Mark of Mastery in the Realm of Sleep, which allowed Xehanort to keep tabs on him as the True Organization 13 manipulated events. Looking at each of the 5 Foretellers, they don't seem to outwardly display any overt key-shaped marks on their shared wardrobe, as the other 2 wear iconic black coats, which also don't display any X's beyond the immediate connection with the organization members. But what is the 3rd letter of Lushu's name, I wonder? Speaking of names, what is up with these characters' names this time around? While the Destiny trio revolved around Japanese words for air, land, and sea, and the Wayfinder trio dealt with the linked elements of earth, wind, and water via a Latin lens, the Foretellers are inspired by Greek for this installment. The names Ira, Envy, Ased, Ava, and Gula are taken from Ira, Invidia, Acedia, Avaritia, and Gula, each translating into wrath, envy, sloth, greed, and gluttony, 5 of the famous deadly sins. This leaves the Master of Masters who never gets named, and Lushu who gets his name from Luxuria, Latin for lust. This would imply that the Master's name should correspond to pride in some way. This is where the obsessive fans come into play here. Likely one of the lasting impressions black cover leaves is the black box. If Lushu was sent out with both no name and the black box, it has to be vital to the story in some capacity. You don't begin and end your film around what Lushu's doing when he's the key to how the Book of Prophecies was written in the first place. Looking at the box, if you freeze frame it, there are 13 locks on it, alongside the top of the box where Key Super is inscribed on top of it. In particular, this Key Super sounds important enough, but Pride in Latin is Superbia, so sit on that fun fact. More importantly, what's actually in the box? If there are 13 locks on it, that automatically means something considering the significance of that number across the series. The real Organization 13, formerly introduced in 3D regarding Xehanort's intention to have his 13 Seekers of Darkness clash with the 7 Guardians of Light to forge the Keyblade the proper way, definitely comes to mind. But as for what's in the box, the jury's still out on that one. Lots of theories abound about round hearts and what keys unlock the box, even if Luxu was instructed to never open it, despite supposedly knowing what's inside, and back cover certainly isn't being explicit about what's inside of it. Despite the ambiguity, series director Tetsuro Nomura has stated that acute fans can figure it out, but as of the publishing date of this video, if you don't listen to the leaks, we don't have an official answer yet, which is part of the fun being 2 weeks away from Kingdom Hearts 3, where we expect to be shown what's finally in the box 2 years later. See you next video for that, for a little addition to this mystery, but as of right now, I have avoided all the leaks, so I don't know what the answer is, for the record. Speaking of, let's talk about the Master of Masters a little bit. This guy is truly an enigma, certainly a character in all but one scene he appears in. Around most of his apprentices, he seems to have a very odd sense of humor and speech patterns, often leaving his own apprentices at a loss for words at his mannerisms. It certainly makes for a character you pay attention to, but I think it's fairly obvious he's putting on a sort of act. It was Nomura's intention for the Master to be unreadable, and he certainly accomplished that. Seemingly serious when he speaks about things like keeping Kingdom Hearts safe, the impending apocalypse, and having a traitor amongst them, one can certainly argue that the Master may not be entirely truthful, especially if you've subscribed to the they're building him up as an antagonist line of thinking. If one has this much information about the future, which was possible because of a self-induced time loop that apparently succeeds, it puts into question all that individual has to gain with such events. Of course, he gave 5 of his apprentices a copy of that book, barring the lost page which was given to Gula, so you'd think they'd have read it cover to cover and figured out any discrepancies present. Of course, it's interesting to think that if the Master did set up his apprentices, what's the end goal then? Was there ever really a traitor? And if the Master knew of one, how could he have not seen it? Or maybe he did and chose to let events occur because he seemed to follow along the lines of nobody being able to change the future, similar to how Xehanort explained that while you can move through time by discarding your body to a point where your body exists in another time, you do not get to keep the knowledge of any events when you return to your own time beyond a faint impression on your heart. So if you cannot seem to drastically change the future and time is said to be immovable, then what is the Master's ultimate objective here by being pretty positive he'd vanish, dim, and fade away without a trace? Did he discard his body? Is he pulling an Ansem and is only a heart underneath the hood? Does he have some relation to Luxu? Because his 6th apprentice certainly didn't express many character traits, seeing how little screen time he got by only observing events for the Master, and we never see any of their faces. There are so many questions here. Tying this back to Unchained Key, Ephemer apparently reached an unchained state and was said to be in another realm. Speaking of realms, the reveal that Chirithy are Dream Eaters was something to chew on. Normally spirits tied to each wielder with the potential of turning into nightmares to indicate someone being taken by darkness, which did happen and prompted this traitor business and the one dark Chirithy that the player faced. The implications here is that Ephemer may have been sent into a different realm, and the question becomes, is it the realm of sleep? Dream Eaters are said to be located only in the realm of sleep, but Heartless are also present, which makes sense when you consider this story about the ancient Keyblade War, but because when you think about it, it doesn't seem to make any sense again. Was the Age of Fairy Tales in a time where the realm of sleep was one with the world if no world was dreaming yet? Ephemer hypothesized that the various Disney worlds that they were gathering Lux from were projections, another word for data, which adds another layer on top of this mystery. Are we seeing events someone is dreaming about the Keyblade War? We're assuming the events are historical truth like Birth by Sleep, but the more you dive into the lore, the more your brain will hurt given this information. So was the player in the real world or the realm of sleep? Are they all in something similar to the Datascape? Maleficent knows about the ancient Book of Prophecies, which was shown to actually conjure up powers from across the timeline, and especially the future, so that thread seems plausible. Is Jiminy's journal a copy of the Book of Prophecies if Maleficent's suddenly interested in it? Is that why she was looking for a link there? And was that why it was able to be digitized and have Recoded be a thing? Or is that just how data can work for the Kingdom Hearts universe, because it's kind of screwy anyway? Is Nomura trying to punish players who think Recoded was a waste of time? Because playing through the saga of Kingdom Hearts Key can be argued takes a lot of time to get through what can be seen as wasted. If the Master has seen the future up to and including what Xehanort has done if he's the last inheritor of no name currently, it's safe to assume that he has to know about the Keyblade. If the Master is said by Nomura to be able to create Keyblades by reaching into the heart and presenting the Foretellers with their own Keyblades, how does that work exactly? Why do the Foretellers Keyblades all have the gazing eyes in them, and how does that relate to darkness since Riku's Soul Eater and Xehanort's Heartless's polearms also had those? How does this all connect, Nomura? And am I quickly losing focus here? Let's try to wrap this up before we completely crash and burn. the events of Unchained Key and back cover seem like they're far removed from the main story around Xehanort and the Dark Seeker Saga, given we have a completely new cast of characters apparently depicting the ancient past. Even more so than Birth by Sleep, Unchained Key seems to be setting up the overall lore of the Keyblade War that caused the world to be engulfed in darkness before being reformed as separated worlds thanks to the hearts of children, which seems to fit in line with the Dandelions' purpose. In particular, I like to bring up how the Master treated Ava in comparison to the other 5. I don't know if it was just me, but he genuinely seemed to not be putting on an act while explaining Ava's role. In every other scene he's in, the Master is exaggerating his voice, gesticulating like he's mute, or joking around and generally confusing his other apprentices. When he instructed Ava to gather Keyblade wielders with potential and an aversion to darkness, the Master seemed genuine. At the very least, he wasn't acting like he was playing a role. He never joked with Ava and very calmly put his hand upon her mask and told her she was the key to ensuring people survive the inevitable darkness by escaping into the world outside. It's possible he was simply playing her, and thus me, but I think that while the Master of Masters generally speaks a lot of truth hidden by a quirky facade, he may have been at his most honest with Ava. We shall see, because there were moments where he did speak without much flair or doublespeak in other scenes, but who knows what he's truly planning. Especially why all 7 wore masks, and what they even look like. The organization's black coat and the Keyblade armors were used to previously hide character designs in the past, so it makes you wonder if the same thing is being done here. Maybe it's just me, time will tell, I'm sure. At the very least, Ephemer and Skuld got actual character designs and were the most important characters outside of the Keyblade Masters. So while it's nice to see that young Xehanort was correct and that Master Xehanort's Keyblade was indeed the most ancient surviving Keyblade, if it's been used by the Master of Masters to depict events that far into the future, it makes you wonder if we will see the Master of Masters sooner than we think. It sure would be annoying to have him building up one villain spread across 7 titles, setting up an inevitable confrontation of 13 incarnations of him, only to be hijacked by Ganon, now wouldn't it? I have faith in the Mora though, but I don't have an answer to how that conflict resolves itself, so we shall see soon enough. And with that, I end this 8th video on Kingdom Hearts Unchained Key and back cover. If it felt scattershot, you aren't going crazy. There was enough to unpack here that I had to get it out because back cover gives some minor context into the 10th title into the series, so I felt compelled to cover the first season of this story first. Were Unchained Key made into a proper 3D Kingdom Hearts, I'd be fascinated to see how it'd translate, because the gacha style of game it currently is seems more detrimental to a cohesive gameplay and narrative experience than a satisfying standalone title right now. It'd also maybe concern itself with maybe 3 to 4 hours max of content, 5 to 6 if they were to incorporate the events of back cover properly into a remake of Key, but allow me to dream for now. That being said, the mysteries it set up have major implications on the series itself, pulling from almost every other game, from Heartless and Spirits coexisting in the past, to a possible future connection with the Datascape. Memories are definitely a major factor here that will be covered in the 10th video. And obviously the seeing into the future can of worms is a lot to get around what seemed to be a simple game being presented as a fairy tale when you started. Hopefully I was able to at least help introduce the important story parts of Unchained Key and how back cover connects to it. At this stage, it's hard to give definite answers as to why you should care and how much it matters, but you wouldn't make an hour-long film if it wasn't important to Kingdom Hearts 3 in some way, right? With that groundwork established here, I can at least move on to the 10th game and final third of the 2.8 collection and begin lining the scattered pieces up for all of you. Don't feel bad if you're still confused, there's more to this soup of lingo and characters that I can discuss next time. This particular video was more to throw all the pieces of the chess set onto the table and begin putting them in their proper places, since Unchained Key is still ongoing as Union Cross, and this video was researched, written, and recorded largely in early December 2018. At this stage, all of Season 1 was complete for a while, alongside back cover only going up to that point anyways. This allows me to cover the basics of what little story there was available, so I can go back to Season 2 and cover everything right up until Kingdom Hearts 3 is here, since fans outside of Japan will not be caught up on this title by then. That's still baffling to me, but that's what I'm here for. The video for Union Cross will cover what I didn't hear, so we're as ready as possible by the time the Dark Seeker Saga arrives to wrap itself up. So long story short, regarding back cover, it's terrible as a standalone film beyond the basic questions even fans will have, such as who these masked people are, what they have to do with the future, where the Master and Lucia went, what happened when the Keyblade War happened, and what's in the black box. The rest of Unchained Key / Union Cross will be after the 0.2 video, so for now just bear with me until next time, where we shall dive into the final chapter prologue. Yes, I know your mind is probably fried thanks to all the words I just said. I will do my best in the final 3 videos to be as clear as possible, since everything key just makes the series even more convoluted right before the epic finale, and I kinda love-hate it. May your heart be your guiding key, and I will see you in the epilogue to the prequel that doubles as the prelude to the second whole-numbered sequel. Follow the hearts, and you'll find the way.